I'm Sadia, and I've been a doctor nearly as long as I've been Richard's wife. We had our ups and downs, but those 30 years flew by like they were nothing. Our house, big and cozy, was always filled with the sounds of life, especially when the boys were young. James and Oliver, our sons, were as different as night and day, yet they both brought their own kind of joy into our lives. Richard and I, both doctors, worked hard to build a comfortable life. We managed to buy a couple of apartments over the years, renting them out for some extra income. Life seemed set on a good path until the day Richard came home looking pale and more serious than I'd seen in years. "Sadia, we need to talk," he said, his voice grave as he dropped his medical bag by the door. "I had some tests done last week. The results, they came back. It's cancer, Sadia." The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and endless waiting rooms. Richard fought hard, but the cancer was merciless. Watching the strongest man I knew wither away was torture. No amount of medical training prepares you for that. One evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, Richard took my hand. "Sadia, if things don't go our way, you need to make sure everything's sorted with the boys, the will's all done. You'll be fine financially." Not long after, he was gone. The funeral was a somber affair. Family, friends, and colleagues. People came from all over to pay their respects. But it was the quiet at home after everyone left that hit me the hardest. Empty spaces Richard used to fill, his things just where he left them. It hurt to see, to remember. A few days post-funeral, I was in the kitchen trying to make sense of leftover food when James stormed in, his face twisted up in worry and anger. Oliver trailed behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," James said, cutting straight to the chase, as he always did. I sighed, setting down the cling film. "Yes, I know. Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." James slammed his hand on the counter. "But what about me and Oliver? We're his sons. It's not right that we get nothing." Now Oliver piped up, trying to smooth things over. "James, let's not jump into this so hot-headed. Mom's still grieving. We can sort this out without arguing." James shot him a glare. "Easy for you to say. You're not thinking about the future." I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of their stares. "Your father and I built this together. He trusted me to handle things, but I hear you. James, it's not my plan to cut you out." "So what then?" James said, crossing his arms, his voice rising a notch. "We just wait until you think it's a good time to give us our share?" "James, watch your tone," I snapped, my patience fraying. "I am still your mother." Oliver stepped between us, his hands up like a referee. "Both of you, please. This isn't helping. Mom, maybe there's a middle ground here." I nodded, rubbing my temples. "Okay, here's what we can do. The apartments your father and I invested in, the ones downtown," James interrupted. "Yes, those." I continued, shooting him a look that told him to zip it for a minute. "I was thinking you each take one. They're yours to live in or rent out, and from the savings, let's say $225,000 each to help you get started on whatever you need." James chewed on his lip, clearly doing the math in his head. "And the rest of the stuff, the house, the money, that stays with me for now. When I'm gone, it'll come to you as per your father's wishes," I said firmly. James looked like he wanted to argue more, but Oliver nudged him. "Let's think about this, man. It's a fair start. Mom's not leaving us in the cold." James finally nodded, tight-lipped. "Fine, but I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises." "Of course," I agreed. "We'll get everything documented properly." As they left the kitchen, I could hear Oliver hissing at James. "Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best." James muttered something under his breath I couldn't catch, and I didn't really want to. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Richard could see us and what he'd think. I hoped I was doing the right thing, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, wasn't always a friend. It was a sunny afternoon, a rare kind that makes everything seem all right, when James brought Isabella over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but James was already head over heels. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right off the bat, Isabella had this air about her like she owned the place. Dressed to the nines, she breezed into my living room with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting for an invitation. James was grinning like a fool beside her. I forced a smile, trying to be the good host. "Thank you, Isabella. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied, then turned to James. "Babe, make sure it's black, no sugar." James nodded and headed to the kitchen, leaving me alone with her, sitting in my own living room feeling like the guest. The silence was awkward until she broke it. "So, James tells me you're pretty well off," she started, eyeing the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I said, not sure what else to add. James came back with the coffee and handed Isabella her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been discussing our future together, planning ahead, you know." "That's wise," I said, glancing at James, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was heading. Isabella set her cup down. "Yeah, and speaking of planning, we were thinking about the wedding, you know. I want something special. James has probably told you. I saw this place perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $30,000. I choked on my coffee. $30,000 just for the rehearsal dinner? James jumped in. "Mom, it's important to Bella. We want to start things off right." I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. "Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Isabella. We need to be reasonable." Isabella's face hardened. "Reasonable? James says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important." James was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. "I'm all for celebrating," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But $30,000 is beyond excessive. I can't justify that." Isabella stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Sadia. I was clear with James that I expect a certain lifestyle." James tried to smooth things over. "Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground." "There's no middle ground on $30,000 for a dinner, James." "That's final," I snapped, losing my patience. Isabella picked up her purse, glaring at me. "Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to reconsider some things." They left soon after. I sat there, reeling from the encounter. The nerve of that girl coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and telling me how to spend my money. It felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't ready for. I was out at the grocery store when James and Isabella decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Oliver was awkwardly entertaining them in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, the kind that makes you want to turn around and leave. But it was my house, so I braced myself and walked in. Isabella, all dolled up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I set down my grocery bags. "Sadia, we thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've settled on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle." I skimmed the list she first handed me. It was surprisingly sensible. Kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. "This seems quite reasonable," I said, feeling a momentary relief. I think the